Hey everyone, welcome to another Modern Deck Tech. Okay, this is going to be the conclusion of my several weeks long Temur Delver expedition ever since Modern Horizons 2 being released. This is Temur Traverse Delver, and I think this is the list. This is the list I would play or am going to play as my Temur Delver list. The past several weeks I've released several deck techs, mostly revising some of my older lists, as well as having some newer lists using all the new toys we got in Modern Horizons 2. This is me going back and saying, okay, if I had to play Temur Delver today, what would be the final 75, or the final 60 I should say, that I'm going to play with, and this is it. So let's get to it, but before I do, I want to do a quick shout out to Tubby Batman, who is a fellow brewer and lover of Temur Delver, and we've been bouncing ideas off of each other and speaking to each other on on the Delver Discord for over a year now. I've been stealing his ideas and passing them off as my own for as long. So I think the least I should do is give him a shout out. He streams on Twitch, and he's actually going to be streaming this deck today, later on at some point. This is going to be the third deck he'll be streaming. At least that's what he told me. So I'm going to put a link down in the description of this video to his Twitch channel. Check him out, subscribe to him. He does a bunch of decks, not just Temur Delver, or not just Delver in general. He brews a lot of other things, but you should really check him out. He has really great content. And yeah, shout out and thank you, Tubby Batman, for even suggesting playing my list. I hope you 5-0, or whatever you do, and if you don't, you're going to have to delete the VOD and ban everyone who was watching. But let's get to the core. Alright, well, this is the official core, I guess, of the list I would want to play. Delver of Secrets being a 4 of. Yes, I'm still sticking to Delver of Secrets, even though DRC, or Dragon's Rage Channeler, does a really good Delver of Secrets impression. I think that the both work together just fine in a Temur list. Of course, I'm playing 4 Dragon's Rage Channelers and 4 Tarmogoyfs. So Tarmogoyf is still sticking around, Delver of Secrets is still sticking around, but I really think that DRC is basically the new mainstay, and I really believe that it's part of the new core. So for me, it would be weird to see a Temur Delver list, or even Izzet Delver, especially Izzet Delver, but it would be weird for me to see a Temur Delver list with no DRC. The Surveil is, if you still are unsure about Surveil, just play with DRC. The ability to filter the top card of your library is super important for the tempo game plan. We have always suffered at the randomness of Magic. Tempo really requires the right answers at the right time, and we've always had the lackluster ability to filter the top card or top cards of our libraries. We've settled for Serum Visions, Sleight of Hand, but even Sleight of Hand doesn't really give you, necessarily an option. You just look at the top 2 and that's it. Surveil is just an additional ability to, look at the top card of your library. If you don't want it, put it into your graveyard. It subsequently helps feed Delirium if necessary. Or if not, it just helps you get rid of a land that you don't need anymore, or maybe a threat that you don't need anymore, or a counterspell you don't need anymore, whatever it may be, you can get rid of it. If you do need it, keep it on top. So DRC really is, an all-star. The fact that it's a 3-3 late game, assuming you maintain Delirium, is just brutal. I've just had nothing but positive experience of DRC. So yeah, it's part of a new core. Tarmogoyf, of course, the core. What about the other creatures? So, especially when you're playing a Traverse list, it's always nice to have at least one target for Traverse other than Tarmogoyf, because normally in Temur Delver, when I was playing Traverse the Elvenwald, I would normally target Tarmogoyfs. Just get more and more Tarmogoyfs and you're good to go. Sometimes you would go get a Hooting Mandrills or whatever. But, here we're not playing Hooting Mandrills. I'm playing 2 other creatures. So, Murktide Regent is going to be a 1-of in this list. Now, if you don't have Ragavan, I'm going to get to Ragavan in a second. If you don't have Ragavan for whatever reason, usually because of monetary reasons, which is understandable, you obviously don't need to play Ragavan in this deck. It doesn't make the deck whole. It does help the deck, obviously, but it doesn't make the deck whole. That's why it's not part of the core. You could play, let's say, 2 Murktide Regents and maybe 2 other creatures, or if you want to go slightly heavier on non-creature spells, add 2 more instants and sorceries, whatever you prefer. There's some flexibility there. But Murktide Regent is a nice Traverse target. When Traverse has Delirium, I'm often going for Murktide Regent, because it's going to be coming out as a 6/6 or 7/7 very often. So yeah, I've had nothing but positive experiences with this. I did have a Temur Murktide Channeler deck tech that I had, I believe, last week or the week before. Don't remember at this point. I've done so many of these. where I was playing 4 of these. Check that out if you want to see how that deck went. I think 4 might be a bit too much, but a 1 of or a 2 of is nice, especially within a Traverse build. Okay, Ragavan. So when Ragavan was first spoiled, everyone was going nuts over it. I understand, it's a great creature, very efficient. I just wasn't sure I wanted to be playing it in my Temur Delver lists. At the end of the day, it is a powerful creature, and we do want to have efficient attackers. And I, of course, had to test it out. I mean, I really did. I couldn't just hate on it forever and not test it. So here you go. I tested it. I played a lot of games with it. Ragavan is alright. Now, we're playing quite heavy in terms of removal in this list, which we know you really should be. So as long as you can keep the path clear, Ragavan does do a pretty good job of, you know, just gaining you a lot of mana, gaining you a lot of tempo, and helping you clear out games really quickly. Your opponents seem to be afraid of Ragavan, to the point where they'll sacrifice whatever creature to stop it. I'm okay with that. I mean, that's perfectly fine with me. I've had plenty of players, you know, sacrifice obviously their key creature just so that Ragavan doesn't get into, you know, getting its treasure token and all that. So just that alone, as long as that's still a mentality that I'm going to see in my opponents, makes me want to play Ragavan. Just Ragavan itself, though, very powerful. The fact that it's legendary is okay at 3 of. You're not going to be drawing too many of them, generally speaking. Of course, you never know what happens with the randomness of Magic. It's been efficient. It's been impressive. I'm not surprised that it's been impressive. Like I said, it doesn't tie the deck together necessarily. This could be many other creatures, or it could be no creatures at all. It could just be an instant or a sorcery. You know, that is possible, but in this list, I wanted to go threat heavy. I feel like it's right for the current meta, and this is what I want to be playing. So this is the core. Ragavan is the boss. Obviously, it's a great creature. We can't deny it. And it works well in this list. If you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. This list still works without it. The cantrips. Okay, so Serum Visions. I mean, I'm kind of tired of talking about Serum Visions. It's there, a 4 of. I do value it over most other cantrips, so it's going to be a 4 of here. I'm going to skip the Abundant Harvest here for a second. Expressive Iteration. A lot of players play 4 of these. I just don't have the space for it here. If you don't have Ragavan, this might be something you can increase to 3 or 4 of. Definitely nothing wrong with it, but I just needed space for other instants and sorceries, as you're going to see. So I settled on 2. I think 2 is just fine. I mean, I don't necessarily want to be drawing too many of these because it is awkward early in the game. So I think 2 of works really, really well. Abundant Harvest. So I was normally playing 4 of these, and I was kind of contemplating if I wanted to play Harvest in a Traverse list, because Traverse does some of the things that you want Harvest to do in terms of getting you lands in the early game and getting you threats or whatever in the late game. I tried it out. I tried playing the list without Harvest, and I just kind of missed Harvest too much. That being said, playing 4 Harvest and 4 Traverse also didn't really work. It was just too much. It was too much of overlapping effects. So what I've done is I've settled for 3 Harvest, and you're going to see when I get to that section, 3 Traverse. 3 Harvest still works really well, really allows you to keep greedy hands. Either they be one land hands, or many land hands and not many threats. You can play Abundant Harvest turn 1 and look for a non-land card. So it really allows you to, you know, be a bit more aggressive, or maybe be less aggressive with your mulligans, I should say, and settle for less, because Abundant Harvest will get you that extra land if you need it, or it'll get you an extra threat if you need it, or a non-land card. So I've been really happy with it. 3 works really well. And yeah, that's it for the cantrips. The removal. 4 Bolt, obviously 2 Tar Fire and 2 Unholy Heat. It's really up to you here how you want to settle your removal. You can remove Tar Fires technically and play more Unholy Heats and something else. I think you should be playing at least 2 Tar Fire because you want the ability to turn on Delirium more often. I'm actually not playing Seal of Fire in this list. You could play Seal of Fire if you really want to. I just wanted to have, you know, at least 26 instants and sorceries. I believe in this list I have 27 total, and that's just a good number. But again, you could fudge around. I'm not playing Mishra's Baubles. You didn't see it in the cantrip section. I'm over Mishra's Bauble. I don't think I need it. I haven't had too much issues turning on Delirium without it, and it's just really a bad card. We often just played it because it was an artifact. It helped with Delirium or growing Goyf or whatever. I don't think you need it in this list. Goyf grows just fine. You could get Delirium just fine, generally speaking. So yeah, Tar Fire it is. And 2 Unholy Heat. Unholy Heat is really great. 6 damage to a creature or planeswalker, super relevant. And again, you're getting Delirium quite quickly, quite often. So definitely relevant removal. I really like playing 8 removal. I actually would like to go to 10. You probably could. You could play around with some of the numbers in this list and go to 10, especially if you're not playing Ragavan or you're playing less Ragavan. So there's really a lot of room to improve here, or a lot of room to add if you go slightly less on threats. So this is why I really like this list. It allows you to be a bit more modular. The permission. I'm only playing 3 Force of Negation. I know it's kind of a travesty considering I'm a huge Force of Negation proponent. Just to be clear there. But I think in this list, especially when you're playing so much removal, so many green spells with Traverse and Abundant Harvest, it just makes sense to play slightly less Force of Negation, so you have slightly less blue spells than you otherwise would. Now, that being said, again, if you're not playing Ragavan, you can up your permission count if you want to be permission heavy in this list and keep the removal package as it is. So again, you have a lot of room to play here depending on what you want to do. This is why I really like this iteration of Temur Delver. It gives the pilot some room to maneuver depending on if the meta shifts. If the meta shifts, towards more spell-based combos or less aggro, you can remove some of your creatures, add more permission or whatever is necessary, or remove some of the removal. You could really play around, and I think this is why I really like this list, is why I'm sticking to it. So here, 3 Force of Negations, 4 counter spells. This has worked for me relatively well. I haven't necessarily felt the loss of 1 Force of Negation. And as you see in the sideboard, I have my 4th Fawn in the sideboard. So it's there if you come across a deck that has no creatures or few creatures and where Force of Negation is more relevant. And that's that for permission. Last but not least, the tutors. You only have, you have 3 of 1 card. Traverse the Elvenwald, the namesake of this iteration of Temur Delver. So, again, similar effects to Harvest early on. You could go pick one of the basics when you don't have Delirium active. I mean, you technically do it when Delirium is active as well, but it's not really what you want to be doing when Traverse the Elvenwald has Delirium active. Once Delirium is active, of course, you go get a Murktide Regent, you go get a Tarmogoyf, you could go get a DRC if you need a blocker in the air to stop your opponent from killing you next turn. Go get a DRC, and that'll do it. So you have a lot of options here in terms of what you want to get. Ragavan could also be an option if you really need Ragavan. You could get it. You could get it in the main phase, then dash it, and have it attack that turn. There's a lot of things you could do with the creatures in this deck and Traverse the Elvenwald. So great card. It's a split 3/3 between Abundant Harvest and this card. I think 3/3 split is fine. I would stick to that. I wouldn't go less on one or the other. So I think of the cards in this list, this and Harvest are probably the least flexible. Like, I would just keep this number. I think 4 of each is a bit too much. I think 2 of one or the other is a bit too little. I think 3 is a good number there. The lands, nothing really changing here. You have 9 fetches total. You have 5 shocks total, and you have 3 basics. I think this is the list. This is the land, the mana base I would go with for this list. If you don't want to be too heavy on shocks, you could change a Breeding Pool for a Botanical Sanctum, a Steam Vents for a Spire Buff Canal, your call, or any number of other, dual color lands. It's really your call, but I prefer having my shocks the way they are here. The sideboard. So again, sideboards change all the time, meta changes all the time, or your local meta might be different from online, for example, but generally speaking, this is what I would stick with. Engineer Explosives as a 2 of course. I'll get to Gravedigger's Cage in a second. Cleansing Wildfire. Trying that out. I was trying Alpine Moon for a long time. I like Alpine Moon. I'm sticking to Cleansing Wildfire for now, just because I want to, when I do bring it in games 2 and 3, I would like to maintain some level of instants and sorceries for Delver flips. Alpine Moon doesn't flip Delver. Cleansing Wildfire does. You'd also get a cantrip out of it, so drawing multiple of these is not bad. So I think Cleansing Wildfire right now is fine. If you feel like Alpine Moon is better, because it's just, you could do a turn 1 and get over it with it, then do that. But I think Cleansing Wildfire works pretty well. 3 Veil of Summer, of course. Destructive Reveille, I'm running 2 of these. I mentioned in past deck techs, I'm coming back to Destructive for now. I'm liking it, I'm enjoying it. It does what you need it to do, and it deals an extra 2 damage, so can't complain there. Huntmaster to Fells, I love my Huntmaster. It's working really well right now against a lot of decks, even the aggro decks. Again, when this creature hits the battlefield, if your opponent doesn't have an answer, either right away or the next turn, it's almost certainly GG. And it's, I'll repeat it again in case this is the first deck you've been watching. Every time Huntmaster comes onto the battlefield, my average amount of turns before I win is 2. And I have so many matches from the past year and a half of that, being proven. So Huntmaster of the Fells is just an awesome card. If you've never played with Huntmaster and played the flip game with it, you haven't lived yet in Magic, so check it out. My fourth Force of Negation is, of course, in the sideboard, and then I have an Endurance and Grafdigger's Cage split. Endurance is a nice target for Traverse, obviously, if you need to. I could play 2 Endurance and not have Grafdigger's Cage, but I like the flexibility of having 2. I don't know if I need more Graveyard Hate right now. I think this is okay, depending on how, if the meta shifts again to have more Graveyard strategies, I may change these numbers, but for now, this is my 15 sideboard cards. Alright, the matchups, which a lot of you are waiting for. Let's start with combo. So again, we have Storm in various forms, we have Living End, and we have the Primetime decks. Primetime decks definitely are getting, power-ups here because of Urza's Saga. Let's stick to the other combo decks for a second here. Storm decks, nothing really changes too much in your win rates. I think, generally speaking, the win rates against Storm are pretty good, including this list. Obviously, you would remove some number, you might even remove your Traverse Yalvanwalds in games 2 and game 3 because you're rarely going to get Delirium against Storm unless they really fumble, in which case you win anyway without Traverse. You bring in Force of Negation, Grafdigger's Cage, Endurance, stuff like that to deal with their graveyard and obviously have more counters. So I think you have a lot of tools against them, not too concerned. And that goes for any heavy spell-based deck or heavy combo spell-based deck, Living End included. Again, Force of Negation, Endurance is a nice card to have as a response to Living End to get rid of everything under graveyard, and then nothing happens. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you could work with these types of combo decks. When it comes to Primetime decks, I mean, again, if you're playing the Amulet version, you want to bring in artifact removal. Force of Negation does help in the sense that you can counter those spells early on, even turn 1. So I still think Force of Negation is relevant. Cleansing Wildfire is going to be very useful here to get rid of their lands, especially Urza's Saga. If you're coming up against a lot of Primetime decks, maybe switch to Alpine Moon, because Alpine Moon is just, again, it's earlier, you can target multiple lands, and you just don't have to worry about it too much. But they'll usually bring in targets for Blood Moon and stuff like that. They'll bring in responses for targets, for Alpine Moon and Blood Moon and all that. So Cleansing Wildfire might be something they don't have a response for, so Cleansing Wildfire just might be better against those type of decks. So I think overall your matchup against combo are okay. You just have to have good practice with this deck and know what those decks are trying to do. Don't overcommit when you don't have to. Keep your mana open for counters, and I think you're good to go. Aggro decks. All right, so you are playing really heavy removal, and by that I mean you're playing more than 4 lightning bolts. You're playing 8 removal, at least in the list that I've shown you here. You could go even heavier. You could go up to 10 easily if you cut some number of other cards or Ragavan, whatever it may be. So aggro decks or aggro matchups are generally pretty good. I've had a lot of success so far, especially when you have removal early on. It's just almost certainly GG. If you get rid of 2-3 of their creatures and you stabilize, you're going to have a big Tarmogoyf and they're going to have no real responses. The only deck I still see getting under our skin is Merfolk, just because they could be super explosive out of nowhere, even more explosive than Elves in my opinion, and they could be really hard to deal with. So that's really the only aggro deck that I'm kind of concerned about. Everything else, even Burn, you have a lot of responses for Burn. Huntmaster of the Fells, again, can come in really handy because if Burn can't deal with Huntmaster of the Fells by turn 4, if they've already emptied out their hand and you've countered some number of spells, yeah, I mean, they're going to lose. Huntmaster's just going to take over. And again, you have a lot of removal for their creatures. They don't play that many creatures in the first place, and you have counters for their spells. So I think your matchups are generally good. Just fetch accordingly. Don't fetch too painfully, and you're good to go. So again, the aggro matchups I'm pretty confident with. Maybe just Merfolk, I have to get more iterations in with them, or just grind with them more. But everything else, I'm pretty confident with aggro with the 75. Control decks. Well, you are playing the control aggro game here. That is what tempo is. So this is why I'm also not too concerned about control decks. Keep in mind, most control decks, especially if they're playing white, but even black, they will have, sweepers in their list, maybe often in their 60. So what that means is you have to look out for Supreme Verdict, Wrath of God, Damnation, or Dam, now that Dam exists. Just keep that in mind. Don't just empty out your hand of all your creatures, because they will wait for the right moment and then take them out. And if they do Supreme Verdict, then you're going to have no answer anyway. So Play right, just assume they have counters, work around those counters, try and bait their counter. I mean, it's just a control game. I mean, I'm kind of telling you how to play against control in general. There's nothing too specific about this list for control matchups. I think it's fine. I'm really comfortable playing against control. Sometimes they get you, sometimes they don't. Some versions of control are way more oppressive than others. It's going to be luck of the draw sometimes, but generally speaking, you work around what you expect them to do, and you're good to go. Just look out for Archmage's Charm. You're playing a ton of 1 CMC creatures, so just keep that in mind. They might steal your card. It's happened, and I got really salty. So Archmage's Charm is probably your biggest fear when it comes to control matchups. Mid-range games, mid-range decks. You could grind pretty well against mid-range decks. A, you have a lot of removal. B, you actually have a lot of threats, a lot more than what I normally have in my Temur Delver lists. You have your decent amount of permission, but not too much. You have Traverse to go get creatures later in the game when they've already removed them. So you can go get your extra Tarmogoyfs or Murktide or whatever it is. And a lot of those mid-range decks don't have proper answers to Murktide Regent, just kind of wins the game. Yeah, you can really grief them a lot. As long as they don't go too hard on discard early on, you have a pretty good game. And in games 2 and game 3, especially with Veil of Summer, it just becomes even worse for the mid-range decks. So I'm actually, again, pretty confident against mid-range. Stoneforge Mystic, obviously all the Stoneblade decks. There's Orzhov Stoneblade now, which can be a bit of an issue, just because they play Path Exile, Fatal Push, and a whole bunch of other efficient removal. But again, keep your removal for Stoneforge, bring in your Engineer Explosives and artifact removals from your sideboard, Veil of Summer as well. Your matchup gets a lot better games 2 and game 3, but you could easily steal game 1, especially if you have an answer for turn 2 Stoneforge. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I really like the mid-range matchups. I've always liked them, even though some people don't like them at all. I think you can grind pretty well. Huntmaster of the Fel is also very key against those decks. Tron, big mana, but I'll just stick to Tron, all iterations of Tron. I mean, my biggest fear really is Wormcoil Engine. That's just really the worst card, I feel. Wormcoil and Ugin. Those are just really the two things you need to have answers for immediately, either countering them or just getting rid of them. Everything else you could pretty much deal with. Cleansing Wildfire will slow them down for sure. And if you draw multiples, that'll help out. If you're playing the Alpine Moon, it's even better. You're going to shut down one of their Tron lands. But again, keep in mind, Tron will always bring in answers to Alpine Moon, Blood Moon, and other types of permanents. So this is where Cleansing Wildfire is better, in the sense that you could remove one of their Tron lands. They're often not going to have counters for that, and you just destroy the land. And they only play a limited amount of basics, sometimes none. So, it's really going to benefit you a lot. It really hurts them a lot more. So keep that in mind. This is why I like Cleansing Wildfire right now. Overall, your matchup against Tron is pretty good. I'm not too concerned about it. Like I said, just if Wormcoil Engine sticks, it's almost certainly GG, unless you have like the nuts hand. Sorry for the voice cracking. It's been cracking for 3 months now. Some cold that doesn't want to go away. Anyway, yeah, the Wormcoil is really my biggest fear. Obviously, Ugin has always been an issue if you don't have a counter for it. But apart from those two, everything else you could deal with Tron. I'm not really concerned. Borderline Magic, Lantern Control is kind of rearing its head right now. Mill, these two decks, these two archetypes, I'm not too concerned about. Yes, sometimes they just get you in a lock and it's a GG. Whatever, that's how they work. They're there to surprise you, and if you're not ready for it, they'll win. But generally speaking, even game 1, you have quite a bit of answers against Lantern and Mill. I'm not too concerned about them. Games 2 and game 3, you have a lot more answers. You have a lot more headaches for them. Just make sure you get rid of that Lantern of Insight early on. And yeah, that's basically, I don't know. I'm just telling you how to beat Lantern here. Generally speaking, like I said, you could do pretty good against them. If you're playing against a deck like Dredge or Dredge variants, whatever they are, well, bring in your Graveyard Hate. Hopefully you have some key permission or removal early on, and hope for the best. It's not a deck right now that I'm actively worried about. I don't think I'm going to be worrying about it for a while. It's always been one of those decks where, they have inconsistent results because it's an inconsistent deck. If it misses on a turn or two, it's almost over. If you counter 1 or 2 Life from the Loams, it's almost certainly over. So yeah, it's just more of a roll of the die for me. It's like a 50-50. Honestly, it's really just 50-50. Maybe sometimes 40-60 in their favor, just because it's stupid and it's not a deck you could easily interact with. Luckily, it is borderline Magic. It is, you know, on the fringes of the meta right now, at least from what I can tell. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. If it becomes prominent, I'll adjust the sideboard accordingly. That's that. And that's it for the matchups. This is it for the deck. I really love this iteration of Delver. That's the one I'm going to be playing with. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. Again, don't forget about Tubby Batman. He'll be streaming this deck later on today. I'll post a link to his Twitch channel in the description of this video. Check him out. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Enjoy my content in general. Please subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook. Share my content on social media. Watch my content start to finish like you are right now. Every second counts, and I really appreciate it. If you want to check out my Patreon, check out the Patreon link in the description of this video. My Patreon is set up to make you money, not me. If you don't believe me, just go to Patreon, check out the 5-6 minute video that's on there. It explains everything. Every dollar I make on Patreon goes into buying sealed product. That sealed product is opened up on this channel. All the rares and mythics, all the valuable rares and mythics are then given back to patrons at the end of every year. The longer you're a patron, the more you get. There's different tiers, but basically at the $5 level, you're guaranteed, you know, at least 6 rares or mythics at the end of every year. That's based on how many months, consecutive months you've been a patron. If you've been a patron for 12 months, you get 12. If you've been a patron for 2 years, you get 24, and then it caps at 24, but every year you get 24. So if the value of each card is between $3 and $15, sometimes 20, you're going to break even and then make more. And that's how my Patreon is meant to be. It's not there to make me money and support me. So it's there for you. Thank you for supporting me, and have a good one.